West Branch.
Probably out trapping.
He's probably out doing it this year.
Good.
So
There's at least one person. Okay. My email's up here. I think you all have access to my email, but if you have any questions at any point, shoot me an email, give me a call. Oh boy, here we go. There we go. Okay, so there's only a few slides on Didymo. I promise I'm not going to just talk about Didymo for another hour again like I did last time, but I did want to provide an update on the grant we received and some of the progress we've made since then. So the grant kicked in this last October. So since then, we've started a sampling initiative to get at the statewide distribution of Didymo, to better understand its ecology through some water chemistry and environmental variable monitoring. And then we started a Didymo network to try to bring together folks who've been working on Didymo across the state, and researchers and just folks who are interested to start conversation around Didymo and make sure everyone's kind of on the same page, because that effort really hasn't happened yet. So here's my 2 slides on the background of Didymo. This one might look familiar. So who all, actually, and I should go back to this last one. Does anyone recognize the Didymo cell in this sample? Pop quiz.
Upper left looks like a bottle.
Close. Is that what you're thinking? Close. It does have the capitate ends like that, sort of. It's this one right here, this champagne bottle kind of cell hidden in there. So this is actually a picture of what a field of view looks like when you're looking at these samples for Didymo under the microscope. So we're just looking for cells that are this shape, that are mixed in with everything else you find in a biofilm sample from streams. So that was at least a diatom though that you honed in on. So
Stupid chemical engineer, so I consider that a victory.
Okay, and who all has, like, I think again, most of you have heard about me talk about Didymo, so you're familiar with the topic, but just to go back to sort of the native status. So this is something that's been an ongoing debate in the state, really the region, for a while. It's considered native to the Northern Hemisphere. So when it pops up in the Southern Hemisphere, like New Zealand, Patagonia, places like that, it's 100% invasive and a problem. Up here, it's definitely a nuisance, but maybe invasive, maybe just a nuisance native species. It's kind of hard to tell. There's been some sampling in the Great Lakes region of sediment cores, and cells have been found dating back at least to the 70s. So it's definitely been around for a little while. The idea right now, I think the leading idea is that, we'll still keep calling it invasive because then we can get funding to study it. But it's maybe not invasive. It might just be a new strain that's new to the area that is misbehaving under certain conditions. That or maybe it is a native strain that is, the environmental conditions are changing in a way that's supporting Didymo to grow and become a nuisance under these, certain conditions. It is spread through angling gear, through kayaks, through anything that's been in a river that has Didymo cells that's then going to a different river. And the one really good way to decontaminate your gear is to use 409 solution. So if you're out and about in a river, and you're going to another river, hit your gear with, just spray it down, douse it with household 409 solution, and you should be good for Didymo and New Zealand mud snails. So it's good for both. That's what we use at Michigan TU. That's what the national staff uses. And it seems there's actually a paper coming out from Oakland University where they've done a few studies, and it found that 409 solution is a great decontaminant for these invasive species. So and it doesn't seem to impact your gear. Like, I know people are weary of like bleach or anything like that to hit their gear with, because they think it's going to make your gear not last as long, not stay waterproof. 409 doesn't seem to have that effect, at least not any more of an effect than like climbing around beaver dams is going to have, right? So waders only last a couple of years for me, at least. I don't know about anyone else, but and then again, just to talk about its ecology. So it seems to consistently bloom or form these stalks. So just as a single cell, it's not really a problem. It's really only a problem when it forms these stalks and starts growing into biomass levels that you can see with your naked eye. Otherwise, it's just a harmless diatom and the biofilm doing its thing, not a problem. But the conditions that seem to cause it to grow uncontrollably and be a nuisance is low bioavailable phosphorus. So that's just a nutrient that's dissolved in the water that all organisms need. Seems like really, really low concentrations of that are like is the key driver of Didymo becoming a problem, which is totally counterintuitive to all other algae issues. Like most other algae issues you hear of, harmful algal blooms occur when you have agricultural runoff that goes into a basin and you have a high concentration of nutrients. You're basically fertilizing the algae and causing them to grow like crazy. Didymo is the opposite, only low nutrients. The other kind of consistent factors seem to be light. So lots of light for lots of photosynthesis to be able to produce these polysaccharide stalks. Consistent flow. So it doesn't seem to grow in like ponds or stagnant water. It's only going to grow in places where there's kind of flowing water, the rivers. It does grow on the north shore of Lake Superior, which is kind of an interesting place for it to grow. And then cold water. So it hasn't really been found in warm places. Pretty much only cold water streams. So you'll notice that these variables usually line up with relatively pristine trout habitat too, which is why it seems to be an issue in trout streams. So did you have a question before I barrel in?
Well, before you said that the water's gotta be moving, I thought, well, that sounds like a Mara Lake would be a perfect place for it.
So Torch Lake, having, I think people are really concerned about the brown algae or golden algae issues there.
Mm.
It's actually a very closely related relative to Didymo.
Yep.
Cymbellas, Gomphanema. They're all diatoms that are capable of forming stalks, just like Didymo. And they also tend to grow under low phosphorus conditions. So could be kind of a similar situation going on, just a slightly different type of diatom in those conditions. So, any other Didymo questions before I move on? Okay, so that was your 2-minute. This is what Didymo is. Now I'll go into what we've been doing. So to get at the distribution across the state. So Eagle DNR in the last few years has maybe taken 30, 40 samples. They really haven't had like a regimented, let's go out and look for this everywhere. And unless it's growing to nuisance levels, to the point where you see it as like a visible biomass, we would never know it's in the rivers unless we're taking samples and looking at them under a microscope. So in order to try to do that and get it like where it's at, where is it not at, what are the conditions like where it's growing, where it's not growing, we've been making sample kits. So my goal is 1,000 samples over the next 2 years. I've made 1,700 of these. They consist of a toothbrush, scrubber, a weigh boat, and a vial with Lugol's iodine. So Lugol's is a great preservative for diatoms in particular. I always tell people it will stain your hands and clothes, but it is harmless otherwise. So the process is basically, you can keep this in your gear in your car year round. This is shelf stable no matter what. Go out when you're out and about in a river, scrub some surfaces. There's actually a survey on your phone that you take while you're doing this just to gather some information about the stream and to geotag where the sample came from so that I can put it up on this map and we'll know where all the samples were collected. But basically you scrub some rocks or some wood, you put a little bit of stream water in here, you dab it off, and you pour your sample into your vial. And this is also shelf stable. So then you actually just seal it up in this and drop it off at a FedEx location and it should make its way back to me. I say should, the FedEx people have told me again and again that these will make it their way back to me, but the one that I've tested has not come back to me yet. So I'm a little worried about that, but these are prepaid FedEx labels that will be delivered to me supposedly, hopefully, because I will be really upset if none of my samples get back to me. But then I look for, I look at them and it looks like something like what I showed you. And basically look at the sample for a set amount of time. If I don't see Didymo cells, I say it's probably not in the sample because you can look at quite a few cells in a short period of time. And that's what I'm doing for distribution across the state. So yeah.
Would it be helpful if like our chapter covers a very specific area,
Mm-hmm.
even to the point where headwaters or chapters is claiming our headwaters for, you look at their promotional stuff.
Yeah.
For the Boyne and the East Jordan, which is fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, instead of just having the folks here, carry a kit or two in their weighting materials, if we were to identify a specific number of locations on each of the tributaries
And go out and sample.
streams that we cover and
Mhm.
and take a more disciplined approach like that, because I think we could organize that.
Yeah.
And then the question is, so you could take samples this time of the year or May or
Any time of the
August, I
year.
mean, is there a
Yep.
better time of the year? or-
Not necessarily. So it seems to pop up at different times of year in different places. So on the Boardman and Manistee, it seems like winter. From what I could tell, like the first bloom on the Manistee, I think was discovered in like January. An extended or a couple months. The Boardman, I'm not entirely sure when they saw Didymo blooms there. On the North Shore of Lake Superior, they see like late fall, I think is when they're seeing it there, but then they see it in their streams like in the summertime up there, which is weird. So it could be anytime. We don't really understand the ecology there. In general, diatoms seem to thrive during leaf off when water's the coldest. So from October through April-ish, cold water, lots of light, that's when diatoms are kind of at their highest competitive advantage. And then once the water warms up a little bit and conditions change, there's sort of a succession of other groups of algae that sort of usually take over. But diatoms are still part of the biofilm then, and Didymo could be present then. So any time of year. A lot of people, so the reason I've been able to distribute 1,700 of these kits, which is a lot, and I'm hoping they'll make their way back to me, but that's going to be a lot of samples to look at over the next 2 years. Is that a lot of the conservation districts that are doing mycore sampling for macroinvertebrates, they sample either 2 or 4 times a year. They are tacking on these Didymo samples to that process. So I'm not against if you wanted to organize and go out and sample very like regimented, that's great. I would love that.
But
But you don't have to
we
do
do
that.
have the Charlevoix Conservation District in Boyne. I mean, we could find out what they're doing too. I'm
Yep,
just
yep.
thinking you'd get better coverage, because maybe no one's going to the Pigeon River, maybe no one's going to Carp River. whatever.
Yeah,
Have you reached out to Tip of the Mill?
I have. They're sampling. Tip of the Mitt. I'm trying to think of the other groups. Sam Day,
Try.
the tribe is sampling. They're going to be collecting almost 200 samples over the next 2 years at all
So
their
that would
sites
be
they
a lot of
visit.
the area we cover.
Yep.
They have a better field presence than the DNR,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Really,
Their
they are.
area.
the premier river keepers, I would argue.
Yeah.
In this part of the world.
Yeah, I would agree based off my conversation with Sam about everything they're doing. So anyhow, the way that I'm thinking about these kits is more opportunistic. So instead of going out just to take Didymo samples, have them with your fishing gear, or include them when you're going out to do beaver dam surveys or something else. You already have another reason to be going out to the river, and then take a Didymo sample while you're out there. Just so that it's not, shouldn't be the main reason why you're driving out there, I guess, in my mind. There should be something that's kind of opportunistic, tack it on. That's, but if you wanted to make it your top priority, by all means, I'm not gonna tell you no.
Well, we monitor river temperature, we have the
Yeah.
Mayfield station, we're doing the dam, so.
Yeah.
We're out.
You're
there
out
for a
there
number of
anyhow.
reasons.
And that's great. So that's brings me to the next part of the sampling. So we are also monitoring water chemistry through weekly water samples at 3 locations. The Manistee and Boardman are both at locations where there have been Didymo blooms in the last few years. The Asable is actually at Gates. There hasn't been a bloom on the Asable, but we did find Didymo cells there. So we know that it's present. There's a population in the Asable, but the conditions don't seem to be right for it to bloom. So we're trying to, through very a pretty focused water chemistry study, trying to figure out if there is a water chemistry driver that we can distinguish that is the reason why. Because just some like background water chemistry samples, it seems like these 3 rivers are relatively similar. They're all very groundwater fed. They all have pretty low nutrient concentrations. So it's, you know, we'll see if we can pick up a signature over the next 2 years. Also see if we get another Didymo bloom, because there hasn't been one for the last year. So we'll, you know, maybe over the next 2 years, we'll get lucky and there will be a bloom. Not that we want to see more Didymo, but it would help us better understand what the chemistry drivers are, at least in Michigan water. So that kind of general ecology, like low phosphorus, that's from studies elsewhere. Like no one studied that in Michigan yet. So we don't really know what that nutrient threshold is, at what concentration of phosphorus we can expect Didymo to maybe bloom at. So that's what we're trying to get at with this study. And then the Didymo network. So we had a meeting on December 5th, which is primarily folks who have been doing research, but you know, also some just interested parties too. And it was talks from researchers at LSSU, some folks at the Minnesota Science Museum, and a few other places, just sharing their work, sharing what they've been finding the last few years in their work, and kind of bringing folks together, which is the idea behind all of this. So previously there hasn't really been a consortium or group of people thinking about Didymo. It's just kind of been disparate. Someone's doing something here, someone's doing something there. They're maybe not communicating their results or findings to one another. So we're just trying to bring folks together and, create some awareness. And one more thing with this, if you're interested, this meeting was recorded, and there's a lot of actually really interesting science that was shared. So if you're bored one day and want to learn more about Didymo and don't want to hear me talk about Didymo, you can listen to some other folks talk about Didymo, if you haven't got enough Didymo. So, and I can send this link out too, but the QR code will take you to our website that has the recording. Okay, so now I'm going to transition to our dam inventory program. And this has been kind of a fun program. This was initiated before I started. It's kind of been when we're not preoccupied with XYZ other thing, we either our staff, national staff, or our summer technicians spend some time working on this. So it's kind of a nice like filler work. And the reason for this effort is that there's not a good comprehensive inventory of all the dams in the state or the country, but specifically in Michigan, there's just not a good inventory. Eagle has their inventory. It's pretty incomplete. Actually, all of these dots on this map is from their inventory. I would imagine there's probably a dam somewhere in there where there's that blank spot, but it's just not documented. So we have started this inventory because of that, because we want a very complete inventory where we can, go through and systematically try to prioritize dams for removal based on some different variables and different aspects of the dams that we're concerned with. I will say there is one national database. It's through SARP, which is like Southeast Area Research something. I don't remember what that acronym stands for, but they have a very good, robust database. It has all of Eagle's dams in it, but we're actually contributing dams to their database and some more information about dams that I'll talk about here. But the other kind of uses for this, so I'll talk about the process, but it can be just man-made dams. But we also identify a lot of beaver dams, faulty road stream crossings, and just other sort of issues on rivers through this process. So it's a good just sort of aerial scan of what's going on throughout a watershed. So I think it's just a good practice in general for kind of getting a feel for what else is going on too. But what it looks like is, you add the National Hydrology Database streamlines, which I can make for certain watersheds, to Google Earth. So you have an aerial image of your watershed and you get this line that shows up that tracks the waterway relatively well so that you can kind of follow these lines and you can say, okay, normal river, normal river. Oh, what's this? And you can say, oh yeah, there's a dam there, and mark it. So it's a lot of us sitting at a computer and scrolling through to see where there's barriers. And then we go through and mark them all. After that, we validate them. The process here is just a little bit more on the process. So sometimes the NHD lines don't follow the stream exactly. It's a model that generates these lines. So it's not like imagery that goes through and traces the lines. It's a complicated USGS model. But with Google Earth, you can put on use different years of imagery. So You can use leaf off years that help, help you see the river a little bit better. And I can go into the details of the nitty gritty of this process if this is something you're interested in working on. But once we go through and identify a bunch of barriers, we can validate them and call them either man-made dams or not a man-made dam. Maybe it's a beaver dam. Maybe it's something else going on the river that we're not sure of, that we need to go out and investigate more. Maybe it's a faulty road stream crossing. And then you can also like hone in and find areas where maybe there's like a hot spot of beaver dams in an area. And maybe that is a signal that, hey, maybe this area should be a place where we consider some beaver management if we're concerned, if this lines up with a cold water system that we're trying to keep flowing and not have barriers for trout purposes, maybe, this helps us prioritize areas to focus in on. So there's a lot of uses for this process we've been going through, but I think that just trying to make this connection with you all, maybe this would be something you might be interested in for your beaver concerns. So
What constitutes a hotspot?
a group of purple dots on the map at this point. There's no like actual science behind that. This is just
But it's a lot of
cluster.
flow blockage or
Yeah.
a lot of dams in one
in
area.
one area. Yeah, which we have noticed. So I haven't gone through the Manistee dams yet. That's why they're still blue. But a lot of these blue ones are actually beaver dams. They're not man-made dams. The man-made dams, someone's already gone through and looked for those. So the rest of these are either not dams or they're beaver dams. But so yeah, just something that you might, if you are bored in the winter when you're snowed in and you want to look through some streamlines, something that I could set you up doing.
So excuse me, is
Yeah.
Google the best resource
Aerial?
for that?
It's
Because when I use
free.
it for finding streams and rivers, I'm very frustrated with it. It doesn't identify streams or rivers.
very well.
Seems to me like there's gotta be something better, but maybe there isn't.
I think Google Earth Pro's imagery, so that's just the desktop, the free desktop app. I think
Right,
that's
just
a
use
little bit better than the,
pedestrian version.
the
Yeah,
like
Google
browser, a
Pro is probably.
little bit better. Yeah.
I mean, you can really zoom in and you can go through the timeline. Not
Yeah.
every location has
Good
the
imagery.
same imagery, but
Yeah.
if you can get the leaf off or winter time, and you got no vegetation. you can See,
Does it identify the names of the streams and rivers?
it will.
You
if
can
zoom
add
in
that.
Really close to lose it, but there's a
Yeah,
sweet
you gotta
spot.
find the
Yeah.
in between.
Yeah. I don't know that it's the best. Onyx has really good aerial imagery, but Onyx is a paid subscription.
Yeah, I had
Google
that,
is free.
and some of the satellite seems a little clearer.
Yeah, I'm not sure where Onyx pulls their imagery from. If it's county flyover or what, but theirs does seem to be better sometimes.
Right.
I often bounce between the two, but Google is just the free and relatively user-friendly version. This is actually an image from Onyx. So once we go through and identify a bunch of man-made dams, the next step is to start collecting different information about those dams. So one of the things that we are thinking about for just feasibility and prioritization of dam removals is how many parcels are around the impoundment. So if there's a bunch of parcels around the impoundment and there's likelihood for, a lot of property owners that are going to not be happy about a dam coming out, it's probably not very feasible to remove. So that's one of our just general feasibility concerns or variables that we're tracking. And this is actually information that we're adding to SARP's database. With the goal, we actually just met with them. So SARP it's a national database of dams. They are trying to get parcel data so that they can run a model and get this information for like all the dams in their database, not just from someone going through and looking at Onyx and counting the parcels, which is what we're doing right now. The issue is that parcel data is expensive. The states or counties own it generally, and they don't just give it to you for free, which is why Onyx is a paid subscription. And I've actually reached out to the Onyx folks to ask them if they would be willing to just run that model on their data set, and they don't have the staff to do that, and they're not willing to share their data set because it's a very valuable data set.
There are some counties, actually, there's quite a few counties in Michigan where
They're
you can
free.
go to the tax equalization and
Parcel
look at the
viewer.
parcel maps.
Yep.
And you can zoom in, not as well as you can on, say, Google Earth,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes you can zoom in fairly
Yep.
fairly closely.
Yeah, I know Oscoda County is good because I do that for East Branch, which I'll talk about here soon, but
I think is it Esri or
Esri, yeah,
is
that's what,
what the
our,
counties generally use?
yeah,
Yeah, there's.
some of them use Esri. But anyhow, so this is, one of the things we're looking at after we identify these dams. Another one is the impoundment status. So from a lot of the imagery, you can see how filled up the impoundment is with sediment. So if it's been around for a while, it's probably, potentially the impoundment is more full with sediment. And this is just one more tactic when we're talking to property owners, like, yeah, your your impoundment's very full of sediment. You're either gonna have to spend some money to dredge this out, maybe fix your dam, or you could just let us remove your dam. So it's just one more piece of information we use for, the potential of like moving forward with a dam removal. The last thing that we're doing is some thermal impact prioritization. So looking at just the DNR classification for the stream that the dam is on, upstream and downstream of the dam. Sometimes you can see if there is indeed a temperature impact just that way. I would say that in most instances, though, DNR's classification is too crude to be able to detect dams. So what we've been doing is actually going out and the Manistee was our first watershed we did this on, went out and put temp loggers upstream and downstream of dams. So by doing that, for a summer, we can go through and look at the July mean, and then we can create maps like this that say, okay, here are kind of our dams of interest that we prioritize for whatever reason. We've gone through and we've said, okay, like the dam in the city of Manton is having a huge temperature impact, like between 8 and 11 degrees upstream, downstream difference for July mean. So that's a huge temperature impact. So we can kind of go through and start really honing in on some dams. Other dams, there's actually will be a temperature decrease because there's a groundwater seep somewhere that's, so it just helps to kind of hone in and maybe not focus energy on dams that are not going to have very much of a thermal impact by removing them, or a benefit by removing them. Maybe we focus our attention on dams that are ruining cold water because of their presence versus dams that are not really having much of an impact on cold water. There's still a barrier and we still would want to remove them regardless, but maybe not our top priority for removal. And if anyone's interested in the data, this is online. So if you ever want to go and look at the DNR classification, I wouldn't say it's always correct, but it is usually close. If not correct, it's only one class, one set off usually. So especially in the lower peninsula. The upper peninsula is a different story. Their model is not very good up there, but so if this is something that you're interested in, I will say we've been working through our priority waters. So we start the Manistee, Sable, PM. We're now on the White and the Manistee. So I think we'll work through all of our priority waters, and then once we finish those, then we'll start working into other watersheds. But if you wanted to get a jump start on this, or if you're interested in knowing how many beaver dams there are, just from aerial imagery, which is usually with Google, within the last 2-3 years at the most, sometimes more recent. I'm happy to set up time to train folks on how to do this and go through this process. And something, if you're bored in the wintertime, it's a great just filler, don't have anything else going on, want to do something. You don't have to have a ton of computer skills to be able to do this. It's just kind of looking through Google, just kind of cruising through Google Earth. The rest of it, once the dams are identified, we will probably continue doing all the Onyx and other data collection that we've been doing, but just going through and finding dams and just putting points on a map where you're seeing dams is really helpful. So again, if you're interested or willing to do that, just let me know. Any questions like that about that before I kind of move on to some other things we're doing? No? Okay. So this is not going to be any new information for Greg, I don't think, because he's spent a lot of time thinking about these America the Beautiful dams. And I will say, I was thinking that either Brian or Kristen were coming up in the next few weeks to talk to you all. So I probably could have included more information about other random things we're doing. But this is a good chunk of our work. So we've been subcontract through Michigan DNR through their America the Beautiful Challenger grant to remove 5, well, it's multiple dams, but it's at 4 sites. So Almena actually has like 5 or 6 dams, dams barriers that we'll be removing eventually. The rest are just single dam sites across this map. So I'm not sure how to get rid of that. Maybe that X, I guess it doesn't really matter, but yeah, it's just there. Oh, there it goes. So you can see, so I'll give more information about Spring Creek, but that's the only one we've removed so far. This East Branch and Halbert will be coming out hopefully this year. Halbert, we're pretty confident it's coming out this year. East Branch is it's a historical dam, so it'll depend on how fast we can move with SHPO and things, but it seems like our ducks are in order for now. See? And then Almena has some historical issues and is just some property owner issues. There's lots of issues with this one, so it's probably not going to happen this year. Maybe next year we'll see. But that one's kind of a mess. And it's just that, so we didn't choose any of these dams to remove. I don't think these are dams that we would have chosen. Maybe Halbert. Halbert's a good one. The rest are kind of strange dams to prioritize for removal. They're all DNR property, or DNR owns these dams, and they're kind of dams that they just want like off their docket. So they applied for this massive grant, and this is 4 of the roughly 20 sites that they have funding to remove dams at. So they don't, like Spring Creek is on a headwater stream. It might reconnect maybe a mile of river. It was a great project. I was very excited to, remove the dam there, but probably not something we would have prioritized as needing to come out like immediately kind of situation. So
But if there's money and you can do
if there's
it,
money and you can do it, then why, like exactly. And that's why we're doing it. Yep, exactly. Exactly. So here's just an area of the Almena dams. This was an old hatchery facility, and these are actually all dewatered at this point. So there's no water in this section. There's a channel, just really a ditch that runs along the side of this and then connects into the stream. It's a mess. This whole site is just a mess. So all of these are very large earthen embankments. This old masonry dam down here is the one that has maybe some historical significance that Greg could probably tell you a lot more about than I can, but it's partially owned by a different property owner that doesn't want this dam to go away. So that one's probably not going to come out. And I think the current design that Kristen's been working on is that instead of leaving all the water in this channel, removing that dam and just cutting all of this out, there's potential that this dam will stay. Some water will be diverted to that channel, but most of the water will be diverted through this area, and we'll remove all these dams and reconnect to floodplain throughout this area and try to improve habitat and make that the flow of the river. It did originally used to flow through here and was kind of diverted to this auxiliary channel. So, but again, this is sort of a mess just because of all the property issues, historical issues.
I was just gonna say that
Complicated.
ditch to the north of the floodplain, that is actually the mill race.
The mill race,
that
yeah,
went there was a series of mid-19th century grist mills down there.
that too, yeah.
And the impoundment
Yeah.
for those mills was actually upstream of where these hatchery dams are. And so that's why that mill race is kind of outside of the floodplain and a separate channel.
Yes.
It's really complicated down.
Yeah, and it's just a really strange site when you go walk around there. Yeah,
Was that a state hatchery or a private?
I'm not sure.
It was a state hatchery.
Makes sense,
It's
DNR.
pretty interesting, trying to think about the archival work on this one. Isaac Walton Lee came to the state and said, if we give you money and buy property, would you build a fish hatchery? And the state already had the Wolf Lake hatchery, which is just, I don't know, maybe 10 miles north of where this is. And so the state said, sure. And so the Isaac Walton League ponied up the money And they started building the dams maybe in the thirties. But they probably span like the thirties to the
Multiple.
sixties or seventies. I think it was
Yeah,
walleye. moving
walleye.
Mainly.
Hmm.
I don't know when they took it out of operation.
What's the river?
Pawpaw trim.
It's just a little creek that dumps into the pawpaw.
Oh, okay.
Elmina Creek, I think, is not.
All right.
No, it has a
it's
different
It's
name.
got a different,
Yeah,
should know.
it's, yeah, I know it.
But yeah, the state thought that the masonry dam was
Thank you.
on their property. And it's like 20% on private property or the rest of the state.
Yeah, so
And it probably dates to the 1840s.
the old, yeah. And it's like kind of a pretty waterfall looking dam, so. The other issue with this one is that the road stream crossing just downstream is very perched. So even removing all these barriers and restoring habitat, it's not reconnecting the river. Because there's no funding to fix the road stream crossing. So it's just a frustrating mess. But our other ones, so this is the East Branch. So this is East Branch Big Creek, which is a trib to the Au Sable. This is a cold water stream. It's a really beautiful stream. There's a lot of beaver activity nearby. But this one is an old, very old dam. I think 1880s to 90s is the date I've seen for construction. It's part of a camp that was associated with logging in the area. And again, Greg could tell you a lot more information about the history on this one. But this is actually on the Michigan Register, and it's being proposed for the National Register. So part of the process to remove this dam is to fully document the area and the dam to make sure that we're having an adverse effect on a historically significant resource. So we're going through the process of documenting it to make sure that we can, then propose it for the National Register. But this dam, we're taking like a passive approach for removal. So it has, north of Luzerne.
Like 5 big creeks down here.
There are, yeah. There's about 4 or 5 feet of head height. But there's not an impoundment on this one. There is kind of a wetland area that's maybe a natural wetland area. It's hard to say. This dam's been here for a really long time, but the idea is that there's a culvert up here that's slightly perched, not severely perched. We're going to be adding some rock veins just to protect that culvert so that it doesn't potentially become perched if there is a substantial head cut. Though we don't think there'll be a very substantial head cut when we remove this. There's a few beaver dams in here that'll probably protect from a very far head cut anyhow, but all of these pilings will be removed. We're actually going to add some riprap to stabilize the banks, which is not something we would normally do. But because we're trying to preserve the rest of the site and not have any effect or minimal ground changes at this site because of the historical significance. That's our approach here. And then we're going to be adding some wood to the stream downstream, which will help with capturing sediment that's released during the dam removal, and improving habitat and narrowing up the stream through this area. So the stream is rather wide through this area. I still don't fully understand how this dam actually worked. They would back up the water and then release water to push logs through. But this area seems to be where the river widened because of that process. So in order to kind of narrow the channel and bring it back to a bankful width of between 10 and 15 feet, which is about what the rest of the river is, we're going to be adding wood to help with that. So this one I'm really, really excited about, and hopefully it happens this year, but it's really going to be dependent on the Historical Preservation Office giving us permission to do so. So another dam in the Au Sable watershed. So this one is at Hulbert Road. Frederick, I think, is the township area. This is an old grist mill site. It's privately owned. This one was lined up for last year, but there were some SHPO issues and it was kind of pushed back to this year. So lots of historical considerations going on with these dam removals. that we're hopefully hoping we can move past into the future, kind of make a relationship with SHPO and get this process figured out so that it doesn't slow down these removals into the future. But this one, Kristen's taking the lead on. It's also a relatively straightforward removal. There is this road with a bridge that she's going to be changing some of the bridge rock on to make it so there's not so much of a drop up there. And she's also going to be adding a lot of wood to improve habitat, capture, sediment release, things like that. But relatively straightforward dam removal. All of the structure is going to be removed. Yeah. Any questions about these before I move on? Okay. So the one that we have removed is the Spring Creek dam, which was is a DNR property kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's up in DNR forestry area. Spring Creek is a small trib to I think it's Cold Creek, which is a trib to the East Branch Fox, which is part of the Manistee watershed. It was a brook trout rearing facility that I don't believe was functioning for very long. I don't know if you found in your research how long it functioned for. Talking to DNR, it was a short period of time. It was deemed to be in poor condition. Essentially, it was a giant pile of sand, which you can see from aerial imagery that backed up water a little ways. There's a standpipe that I'll show you a picture of, but overall, this removal is a relatively easy one. It's really just excavate all the sand, take it off site, pull up the culvert. It's all sandy substrate through there, so we just added some wood to kind of create a bank and help support the bank as it became vegetated. And really it was a very passive approach, which was nice for my first dam removal. So this is what it looks like pre-removal. DNR had some issues with folks driving ORVs through here and up this slope over here that they were pretty concerned about. So we ended up removing all this and then putting this back and making it a true barrier so that folks can't actually drive through there now. And then this is the pond looking up. So DNR dewatered this pond by, you can't really tell from this picture, but the standpipe has wood slates on the backside. So you can just remove the wood slates and bring the water level down. So they had done that a few years ago, and there's a nearby property owner that I think liked duck hunting up there, so he put the slates back in. So it was rewatered a few times, but you can tell sort of from this picture, from previous dewaterings, the stream had sort of created its channel and sort of figured out its path already. So when it was dewatered for the removal, there was already really a pretty good channel through there just from past dewaterings. But this is what it looks like now. Hopefully it looks even better now, but this is from, these pictures I think are from October, November. This removal happened in the end of September. But basically it was just excavating this giant earthen embankment. It's about 2,300 cubic yards of sand that they took off site. The original idea was to put it on the 2 tracks up there. So the DNR forestry wanted us to try to improve the 2 tracks because there's a ton of logging in that area and they're all pretty beaten up 2 tracks. But it turns out putting loose sand on 2 tracks isn't the best idea. So thankfully we had a nearby property owner who wanted the construction crew to do some work on his driveway anyhow, that also wanted a big pad of sand on his property for, I don't know what reason in the future, but he was thrilled to have this pile of sand put on his property. So it worked out well, but it was a really just fun process to see. So this was a culvert that went through that giant earthen embankment. And just seeing, I have videos of the construction crew, the excavators grabbing the culvert and, pretty much having this channel formed around the culvert so that when the culvert comes out, the stream could just flow through there, but just pulling the culvert up as if it was just like a straw, just yanking it up. And it was pretty cool to see that happen. But yeah, there's we actually have some pictures of fish making their way upstream now. So it's no longer a fish barrier. There are beaver dams just downstream, but the fish seem to be getting through those. So, but it doesn't go, this is a headwater stream. It doesn't go very much further upstream than this, maybe a mile, if that. So
When was it removed?
this last September. So September 2024.
How did this landowner that needed fill happen to find out there was some available?
So he reached out to me, actually. So when this went up for the permits to, be able to do this work, the Eagle and Natural Rivers permits, I included his information as the nearest property owner. It's really the only property owner nearby this system. So he was notified that there was going to be some work happening in the area, and then he, reached out and, yep. It's a really funny call when he first called me. He's like, I'm looking for a Jordan Stall, someone who's working on this dam near my property. I'm like, yep, that's me. And he's like, well, he's removing a dam. I was like, yep, that's me. It was comical. He was a character, but I think that's all. Yeah, that's all I have for you. There's lots of other things we're doing that are in the works, but I figured this would be a good cover of some of our,
Jordan, how long did that one take, start to finish, to get it out?
just the construct, like
Just the actual
deconstruction.
Demolition.
A
couple
week?
days.
Yeah. Yeah, just it was mainly excavating all that sediment. And there were two vehicles. One would be backed up being loaded while the other one was dumping, and they were just constantly in rotation. Moving so much, just so much sand. So, take care. Yeah, please do. You can take multiple if you want.
Oh, I've got some.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Nice meeting.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah, more than a week.
Do you work or communicate with CRA?
A little bit.
On removals, but they've had some pretty significant projects, right?
Yeah, I
That, to
actually,
your point. Whoever asked the question, take many years.
yeah.
Just knock one out in a few months. It's not typical.
No, not typical. Just the permitting process, you have to go out there and survey and come up with the designs. And for this project, we did everything in-house. Pretty much, like the design work, like Greg was our only consultant for the historical background because this is federally funded and we had to submit information for SHPO purposes through like a registered archaeologist, I think, has to make those reports. So other than that, like the design, everything else was in-house. Like the construction, like we don't own the excavators, obviously. We contract that as well. But it just submitting the permits and then getting feedback and going back and forth with them and takes some time. But yeah, this one, about a year of a little bit of work here, a little bit of work there, going back and forth with folks, getting the plans together.
The big board member, $20-some million.
Oh, yeah,
Huge.
and that was what, 4 dams?
Yeah, this was,
You have to rebuild roads, bridges.
Oh, yeah.
That was huge.
I mean, this one's gotta be relatively
MDOT
simple
data.
Yeah.
compared to some of those others, because this was really just
Yeah.
picking up the
Sand.
sand, moving it, right?
yeah,
Very-
it's about $86,000 for this entire project,
Hmm.
which
Much?
86,
And I'm sorry, did you say already how much sand it turned out?
like
What-
2,300 cubic yards. It's a lot of just like that, like just nonstop. I think they would put 5 or 6 cubic yards in the trucks they were moving the sand with. So just that on repeat for
So did that
an entire
landowner pay anything for the sand?
beer.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he came up with that. Originally, they were like, yeah, maybe we'll like charge him a little bit. And they had talked about that.
But
stayed out of it.
Somehow.
Yeah, but
So-
it ended up saving us so much time. This would have taken so much longer if we had to move that sand out further to different 2 tracks and areas where DNR wanted it to go. So by just moving it, short distance to this property owner's property was, really nice. And he was thrilled. He was so happy. He just wanted his driveway widened a little bit. And then when he was like, oh, you have all this sand, what are you gonna do with it? Oh, put it right here. It's like, he was so excited. So. But. Yeah, it was interesting. So that barrier, the metal barrier in the rocks is actually where this picture is taken, looking out. So it's pretty much impossible to get any equipment through there now.